All right. We are live. Live. Good evening, everybody. Welcome again to Stygian Articles, presented by the Lovecraft Tapes podcast. And as most of you know, I am Jeremy, keeper of arcane lore. And tonight, I'm going to read some horror fiction for you as I drink my peppermint tea. I must warn you, listener discretion is advised. The scary stories I read and write will sometimes contain extreme horror, violence, language, and other adult themes. Watch and listen at your own risk. I'll let you know right off the bat that I don't think either of these tales are particularly rough, so should be easy going tonight. We begin our first tale, The Thing at Nolan by Ambrose Bierce. To the south of where the road between Leesville and Hardy, in the state of Missouri, crosses the east fork of May Creek stands an abandoned house. Nobody has lived in it since the summer of 1879, and it is fast going to pieces. For some 3 years before the date mentioned above, it was occupied by the family of Charles May, from one of whose ancestors the creek near which it stands took its name. Mr. May's family consisted of a wife, an adult son, and two young girls. The son's name was John. The names of the daughters are unknown to the writer of this sketch. John May was of a morose and surly disposition, not easily moved to anger, but having an uncommon gift of sullen, implacable hate. His father was quite otherwise, of a sunny, jovial disposition, but with a quick temper like a sudden flame kindled in a wisp of straw, which consumes it in a flash and is no more. He cherished no resentments, and his anger gone, was quick to make overtures for reconciliation. He had a brother living nearby who was unlike him in respect of all this, and it was a current witticism in the neighborhood that John had inherited his disposition from his uncle. One day, a misunderstanding arose between father and son. Harsh words ensued, and the father struck the son full in the face with his fist. John quietly wiped away the blood that followed the blow, fixed his eyes upon the already penitent offender, and said with cold composure, "You will die for that." The words were overheard. Uh, sorry. The words were overheard by two brothers named Jackson, who were approaching the men at that moment. But seeing them engaged in a quarrel, they retired, apparently unobserved. Charles May afterward related the unfortunate occurrence to his wife and explained that he had apologized to the son for the hasty blow, but without avail. The young man not only rejected his overtures, but refused to withdraw his terrible threat. Nevertheless, there was no open rupture of relations. John continued living with the family, and things went on very much as before. One Sunday morning in June 1879, about 2 weeks after what has been related, May Sr. left the house immediately after breakfast, taking a spade. He said he was going to make an excavation at a certain spring in a wood about a mile away so that the cattle could obtain water. John remained in the house for some hours, variously occupied in shaving himself, writing letters, and reading a newspaper. His manner was very nearly what it usually was. Perhaps he was a trifle more sullen and surly. At 2 o'clock, he left the house. At 5, he returned. For some reason not connected with any interest in his movements, and which is not now recalled, the time of his departure and that of his return were noted by his mother and sisters, as was attested at his trial for murder. It was observed that his clothing was wet in spots, as if, so the prosecution afterward pointed out, he had been removing blood stains from it. His manner was strange, his look wild. He complained of illness, and going to his room, took to his bed. May Sr. did not return. Later that evening, the nearest neighbors were aroused, and during that night and the following day, a search was prosecuted through the wood where the spring was. It resulted in little but the discovery of both men's footprints in the clay about the spring. John May, in the meantime, had grown rapidly worse with what the local physician called brain fever, and in his delirium raved of murder, but did not say whom he conceived to have been murdered, nor whom he imagined to have done the deed. But his threat was recalled by the brothers Jackson, and he was arrested on suspicion, and a deputy sheriff put in charge of him at his home. Public opinion ran strongly against him, and but for his illness, he would have probably have been hanged by a mob. As it was, a meeting of the neighbors was held on Tuesday, and a committee appointed to watch the case and take such action at any time as circumstances might seem to warrant. On Wednesday, all that was changed. From the town of Nolan, 8 miles away, came a story which put a quite different light on the matter. Nolan consisted of a schoolhouse, a blacksmith shop, a store, and a half-dozen dwellings. The store was kept by one Henry Odell, a cousin of the elder May. On the afternoon of the Sunday of May's disappearance, Mr. Odell and 4 of his neighbors, men of credibility, were sitting in the store smoking and talking. It was a warm day, and both the front and the back door were open. At about 3 o'clock, Charles May, who was well known to the 3 of them, entered at the front door and passed out at the rear. He was without hat or coat. He did not look at them, nor return their greeting, a circumstance which did not surprise, for he was evidently seriously hurt. Above the left eyebrow was a wound, a deep gash from which the blood flowed, covering the whole left side of his face and neck, and saturating his light gray shirt. Oddly enough, the thought uppermost in the minds of all was that he had been fighting and was going to the brook directly at the back of the store to wash himself. Perhaps there was a feeling of delicacy, a backwoods etiquette which restrained them from following him to offer assistance. The court records, from which, mainly, this narrative is drawn, are silent as to anything but the fact. They waited for him to return, but he did not return. Bordering the brook behind the store is a forest extending for 6 miles back to the Medicine Lodge Hills. As soon as it became known in the neighborhood of the missing man's dwelling that he had been seen in Nolan, there was a marked alteration in public sentiment and feeling. The Vigilance Committee went out of existence without the formality of a resolution. Search along the wooded bottom lands of May Creek was stopped, and nearly the entire male population of the region took to beating the bush about Nolan and in the Medicine Lodge Hills. But of the missing man, no trace was found. One of the strangest circumstances of this case is the formal indictment and trial of a man for murder of one whose body no human being professed to have seen, one not known to be dead. We are all more or less familiar with the vagaries and eccentricities of frontier law, but this instance, it is thought, is unique. However that may be, it is of record that on recovering from his illness, John May was indicted for the murder of his missing father. Counsel for the defense appears not to have demurred, and the case was tried on its merits. The prosecution was spiritless and perfunctory, the defense easily established, with regard to the deceased, an alibi. If during the time in which John May must have killed Charles May, if he killed him at all, Charles May was miles away from where John May must have been, it is plain that the deceased must have come to his death at the hands of someone else. John May was acquitted, immediately left the country, and has never been heard of from that day. Shortly afterward, his mother and sisters removed to St. Louis. The farm having passed into the possession of a man who owns the land adjoining and has a dwelling of his own, the May house has ever since been vacant and has the somber reputation of being haunted. One day, after the May family had left the country, some boys, playing in the woods along May Creek, found concealed under a mass of dead leaves, but partly exposed by the rooting of hogs, a spade, nearly new and bright, except for a spot on one edge, which was rusted and stained with blood. The implement had the initials CM cut into the handle. This discovery renewed, in some degree, the public excitement of a few months before. The earth near the spot where the spade was found was carefully examined, and the result was the finding of the dead body of a man. It had been buried under 2 or 3 feet of soil, and the spot covered with a layer of dead leaves and twigs. There was but little decomposition, a fact attributed to some preservative property in the mineral-bearing soil. Above the left eyebrow was a wound, a deep gash from which blood had flowed, covering the whole left side of the face and neck, and saturating the light gray shirt. The skull had been cut through by the blow. The body was that of Charles May. But what was it that passed through Mr. Odell's store at Nolan? All right, that was The Thing at Nolan by Ambrose Bierce. Interesting little sort of ghost story in a rural framework. It's interesting, too. You can sort of see the cadence of H.P. Lovecraft that he learned from Ambrose Bierce and utilized in his tales. Slightly different, but still the seed is there. All right. Well, that was rather quick. I thought that would be a little bit longer. Our second tale is entitled Raw Feed, written by me. Halfway across the bay, Taylor reached inside his coat pocket to feel the reassuring heaviness of the gun. Crisp wind whipped across the water and scorched his ears. Bright autumn colors beamed from treetops on the island ahead. Everywhere, the earthy scent of leaves dead and dying. The ferry wouldn't dock for another half hour. He had plenty of time to plan what he would do once he got to the old man's house. Come in, Mr. Rayburn. You're expected. The stately manservant moved slightly to the left to let the guest enter. As he did, Taylor felt the other man's eyes sliding over him, sizing him up. The door closed behind them with a firm snick. Taylor's eyes adjusted to the dim interior almost immediately. Large foyer with Italian marble floor, redwood staircase winding up to the second level, sitting room with overstuffed chairs to the left, a darkened corridor to the right presumably led to the kitchen. Somewhere, a clock ticked loudly, and he smelled fresh brewed Earl Grey tea. Please have a seat. You're early. The appointment had been for 2 p.m. sharp. Taylor checked his watch. 1:48 p.m. May I get you something? He shook his head and sat. No, thanks. Very well. I'll see if he's ready. The butler disappeared into the gloom. Rayburn had been as good a name as any. It got him this far, far enough for an appointment with perhaps the most reclusive man on the planet. Taylor pulled out the fake credentials from his wallet and put them in his jacket pocket next to the small automatic pistol. That way, when the time came, he could pretend to be going for his identification. Not a perfect scheme, but it should hold up against a 90-year-old man and the hired help. He took a breath. Almost over. Outside the double-paned windows, overgrown shrubs brushed against the glass, shivering in the wind. He will see you now. The stooped servant waited in the foyer, outstretched arm indicating the stairs. First landing, 2 doors on the right. Thanks, Taylor muttered and began to climb. The dark wood railing gleamed with years of polishing. Underfoot, the steps barely creaked under his weight. He looked back to see the butler watching him intently. First landing, second door, the man called up, then glided away. Taylor ascended until he stood at the second door on the right, first landing. Should I knock? He thought. Yeah, right. And maybe I should call out, Hello, Mr. Flanagan. I'm the guy who's going to kill you today. Instead, he opened the door silently. The old man lay on his bed, penetrating blue eyes, peering intently at the doorway. When he saw Taylor, a flicker of indeterminate emotion crossed his features. He raised a frail, stick-like arm in welcome. Come in, son, his weak voice called out. Taylor closed the door. The room was enormous. Against the wall opposite the bed, A floor-to-ceiling bookcase groaned under the burden of 1,000 hardcovers. A state-of-the-art television hung suspended from brackets mounted to the ceiling, looking out of place in this turn-of-the-century house. On the west wall, thick glass windows opened onto a vista of the lake. The sun dipped toward the horizon, making its initial descent. A straight-backed chair was placed next to the bed, just out of arm's reach. "Please, sit," said Mr. Flanagan. Taylor unbuttoned his jacket and sat down. A few awkward moments passed while the old man scrutinized him. This was his first visitor in many years, if you believe the stories of his reclusive life. Taylor sat patiently, waiting until the examination was done. Flanagan nodded and eased back into his pillow, staring up at the ceiling. "I know why you're here," he said. A shock of surprise went through Taylor. He willed it away, then remembered his cover story. "Right," he said. "My magazine wants the inside scoop on your many accomplishments. A kind of biographical article to celebrate the 50th anniversary of your most famous invention, the torsium transistor. It revolutionized the television industry as well as..." Flanagan held up a skeletal hand. "Spare me the bullshit. You're here to kill me for stealing your grandfather's secrets." Taylor's mouth went dry. His eyes felt ready to pop out of his skull. How could Flanagan have known? His immediate response was to leap up from the chair and make a run for the door, where the manservant would most certainly be standing guard with an old-fashioned double-barrel shotgun. Out the window, then. Maybe there's a trellis I can climb down. "Relax, Taylor," said the old man, a sarcastic grin stretching his saggy, freckled skin. "You're going nowhere." Something inside him steeled against the knowing mockery. He stood up then, reached into his pocket, and pulled out the pistol, pointing it at the old man's concave chest. This would shut him up. Instead, Flanagan seemed to smile more fully, really enjoying the show. "Go ahead," he teased. "Pull the trigger, Taylor." A flash of white-hot fury erupted in his head. This old fuck dared to taunt him? Did he have a death wish or something? If so, Taylor meant to fulfill it right now. His finger tightened on the trigger. Nothing. Taylor blinked. The trigger was stuck. Did he have the safety on? No. He steadied his hand and flexed his finger 3 times in rapid succession. No response. His finger didn't move. The message to shoot wasn't getting from his brain to his hand at all. What the fuck? A dry chortle rasped from the bed. "No, I believe you mean to say, when the fuck?" The old man motioned to the chair again. Sit down, Taylor. He did as he was told, numb with shock, still staring at his hand. He put the pistol back in his pocket and found his fingers could move again. Flanagan coughed weakly, sputtering like a dying engine. Color rose to his gray, sunken cheeks, but it sank below the surface again within moments. When he appeared composed once more, he took a rattling breath and looked at the bedside clock. It is now 2:13, he said. You will shoot me dead at exactly 2:31. That doesn't give us much time to get acquainted. Taylor frowned. You want to die? Of course, Flanagan smiled without a hint of irony. I've developed leukemia, and at my age, I don't need to tell you that's as good as a death sentence. So I can lay here and dwindle for the next month or two, or you can put a bullet in my brain in precisely 17 minutes. Taylor glanced at the clock. 2:14. You stole my grandfather's notebook. The torsium transistor was his idea. Those exact words he'd practiced many a time in front of a mirror, giving them subtle inflection and dramatic volume. Now they fell from his lips like ash. Yes, Flanagan said without hesitation. I did steal his notebook. But you are wrong about the torsium. It was my idea. Mine. He crept into my lab one night in 48 and copied my plans, then destroyed my originals. He meant to blackmail me or claim the invention as his own. Liar. Taylor's fist clenched at his side. No, son. That's the truth. Your grandfather was the thief, not I. You had him killed. Flanagan nodded. Of course. That's what we did in those days. Eye for an eye and that sort of thing. Your grandpap was stupid, greedy, and the Torsium Project was funded by some particularly unsavory individuals. He messed with the wrong financiers. Taylor tried to absorb the information. His pride, his desire to rectify the black mark against his family name, flared angrily. Flanagan was convincing, however. Was it possible that Dad lied about what really happened to Grandfather? No, it couldn't be. All that time growing up, feeling the hatred for some unknown man named Flanagan, growing until he found himself face to face with the enemy and unable to follow through? All for nothing, he whispered under his breath. Inside, something deflated. He felt weak, vaguely nauseous. He had to get out of here before the old man or his servant called the cops. He tried to get up. His legs remained still as dead wood. No matter how he strained, he could not stand up. Ah, the burden of fate, observed Flanagan. that sly smile creeping back onto his face. It guides us all, and yet we struggle. Taylor leaned back into the chair. What did you do to me? Me? Nothing. The ancient man pulled himself more upright onto his pillows, shaking with the effort. Tell me, Taylor, do you believe in predestination? You mean like things are meant to happen? Yes, exactly, Flanagan said. That circumstances are beyond our control, and everything we do is according to some divine plan. Taylor laughed uneasily. I don't believe in God. Nor do I, responded the old man. Yet, here we are. He raised his hand. It held a remote. With the press of a button, the television flickered to life. The image was an overhead view of this very bedroom. With Taylor sitting in the chair, Flanagan sitting up in bed, and the afternoon sunlight streaming through the thick glass at the end of the room. Flanagan hit another button. The scene unfolded in reverse. The old man lying down. Taylor standing up, pulling the gun from his pocket, putting it back, walking backward to the door and out of camera range. And the sun ever so subtly moving back up toward high noon. Flanagan paused the video. Big deal, Taylor said. Use hidden cameras to record everything. He tried to remain calm, but realized this could be used to prosecute him. Exactly, said the old man. I've installed 73 cameras all around the house and grounds, and they're programmed to record 24 hours a day. So, I recorded this particular scene 23 years ago. Taylor stared at the old man. I've been waiting that long for you to kill me in exactly 9 minutes. You're nuts. In answer, Flanagan punched another button. Fast forward appeared in the lower right corner of the television screen. Like an old-time silent movie, the events of the last few minutes sped across the screen. Only this time they kept going. The Taylor on screen pulled out his gun again. This time it went off, and the old man's head blew apart like a piñata stuffed with red confetti. The assassin turned and fled out of camera range. The bedside clock read 2:31. You see, said Flanagan, pausing the picture on his own corpse. Bullshit, whispered Taylor. His legs were trembling, though. It's doctored or something. Staged. That's not even me. Flanagan smiled. Oh, it's you all right. I don't believe it. Neither did I at first. The old man settled back into his pillows to get more comfortable. It was an accident, really. We were testing the tortium, putting it through its paces. One of our team came up with the idea to have it record live video feed and store it for viewing later. That's a DVR, said Taylor. Flanagan nodded. Yes, it eventually became that technology, with a slightly modified version of the transistor, of course. We couldn't let what happened occur in every household in America. What happened? The words came unbidden to Taylor's lips, and he couldn't remember forming the question in his mind before saying it. Just as you see here, Flanagan said, pointing at the television. Only the tip of the iceberg. After numerous tests, we discovered an anomaly, a time signature of 2 seconds in the future. At first, we dismissed it as a technical glitch, but it quickly became apparent it was something else. Somehow, the torsium could record the future. Beyond the window, a gull wheeled by, its shadow misshapen, and its cry plaintive. After that, I suspended all projects and closed the lab for 6 months while I tried to isolate the mechanism that caused the effect. I succeeded. In secret, I began to enhance the transistor until I could control the time frame it recorded. I delivered a modified version of the torsium without the ability to record future events to the rest of the team for development, while I kept the original version. And that's when you rigged your mansion here with cameras? Taylor asked. Yes, Flanagan confirmed. At the time, it was a grand experiment of which only myself and a select few others were privy. There was talk of setting up a global surveillance system to help reduce crime and wars. It would be the ultimate spy satellite, able to detect transactions and conversations far into the future. But none of that bore fruit. Politics is too fickle a mistress for any long-term plans. My invention turned into this, an idle plaything with a deadly secret. The exact day and time I would be murdered. Get up and walk away, Taylor told himself. Just go. He tried, but his legs refused to budge. I can't stand up, he said. Flanagan glanced at the clock. No, you have about 60 seconds before you can do that. I don't want to kill you anymore. Taylor gritted his teeth with the effort of trying to get out of the chair. I know, said the old man, almost kindly. It's out of our hands. Always has been. I've been trying for over 2 decades to avoid being here. Nothing I've ever done has changed what I recorded in the future. The clock flickered. 2:30. Taylor stood up. Of its own accord, His hand brought out the gun, pointed it at Flanagan's head. "I'm so sorry," said Taylor. A rivulet of tears sprang from both his eyes, blurring his vision. He didn't think it would matter somehow. The kill shot on video had looked expertly aimed. "One last thing," Flanagan said. "A couple years ago, I hired a private detective to find where you lived. When he found you, he snuck in while you were at work and installed a surveillance system similar to this one." A cold shock went through Taylor's system, though his gun hand remained steady. "Does it record my death?" Flanagan shrugged. "It'll show you anything that happens in front of the camera lens, any time in the future. You can watch it on your own television on video input 4. The remote is hidden under the..." Taylor didn't hear the gun go off, but red confetti rained down over the bedspread. He dropped the weapon and ran to see what the future held for him. All right, that was Raw Feed. Sort of a sci-fi tale I penned a little while ago. And not sure really what the inspiration for that was. I don't think at that point I had seen Minority Report, but maybe I had. Maybe I was aiming for something of that caliber. Thought it was just interesting. And I've always been particularly drawn to stories where someone inadvertently makes a piece of technology that somehow backfires on them. I've got, there's another one too that I have that's a bit more violent and gross. I may read that at some point. We'll see. All right, guys, that concludes this installment of Stygian Articles. Thank you for spending some time with me. I appreciate that. If you've enjoyed this dark fiction, please visit StygianArticles.com for more of my scary stories, and LovecraftTapes.com, can't get that right, for fresh episodes of our Call of Cthulhu Actual Play podcast. I'm Jeremy, your keeper of arcane lore, wishing you sweet dreams. Good night.